In one California city, the average homeowner has watched more than $700,000 disappear from the value of their property in just 2 years. And this is not some theoretical loss that only exists on spreadsheets or online estimates. These are real homes being sold at closing tables, with actual paperwork signed and sellers leaving with checks worth only a fraction of what they originally paid back in 2023. Now, this is not happening across every part of California. In fact, some cities are still seeing home prices climb to brand new record levels. But there are 10 very specific zip codes where the exact opposite is unfolding right now, and the declines are getting harder to ignore. What makes this situation even more surprising is that the real cause is not what most people have been hearing about. It is not mainly because of higher interest rates. It is not being driven by tech industry layoffs. And it is not simply a shortage of buyers either. The real problem runs much deeper, and unlike temporary market conditions, this is something far more difficult to reverse once it starts. Today, we are breaking down 10 California cities where home values are collapsing fast, with prices dropping like a stone. And there is one major factor connecting every single one of them. Coming in at number 10 is a small mountain community in Southern California that spent years depending heavily on wealthy second home buyers to keep its economy alive. But by 2024, something changed. Those buyers who once flooded into the area started disappearing. Big Bear Lake is home to only around 5,000 full-time residents and sits high in the San Bernardino Mountains inside San Bernardino County, about 100 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. For more than 20 years, the town became one of the favorite getaway markets for affluent buyers from Los Angeles looking for vacation properties. During the winter, people came for skiing. In the summer, they came for the lake, hiking, and cooler mountain weather. The fact that it was only a couple of hours from the city made it even more attractive. From the early 2000s all the way through the housing frenzy that peaked after the pandemic in 2022, home values in Big Bear climbed steadily year after year. But eventually, the numbers that once made these purchases seem profitable started falling apart all at once. The first major hit came when California cities began tightening restrictions on short-term rentals, and those policies eventually reached Big Bear in 2024. Limits were placed on how many nights properties could legally be rented each year, and for many investors, expected rental profits were suddenly cut nearly in half. Then came the insurance crisis tied to wildfire risk. By 2025, insurance costs in mountain communities were already surging, and in 2026, the California Fair Plan introduced a massive 35.8% rate increase that hit homeowners in areas like Big Bear especially hard. At the same time, the exact type of buyer who had been fueling the market for years finally started reevaluating the numbers. Wealthy second home shoppers with disposable income began adding everything together: skyrocketing insurance premiums, rising property taxes, and shrinking rental revenue. Once they did the math, many simply walked away instead of buying. According to Zillow data from March 2026, the typical home in Big Bear Lake is now selling for around $551,700, reflecting a yearly decline of roughly 6.4%. Some housing trackers still describe the market as flat or stable, but Zillow's numbers tell a different story, and so does what local owners are experiencing firsthand. In 2026, the second home in Big Bear is no longer viewed as the perfect mountain escape. For many owners, it has quietly become an expensive financial burden they are trying to unload before things get worse. At number 9 is a small Northern California lake town where falling home prices are being driven by forces far more serious than weak buyer demand. In this market, the biggest problems are not happening inside the housing industry itself. They are happening directly on the land surrounding the community. Lakeport is a town of roughly 4,800 residents located in Lake County along the western edge of Clear Lake, about 2 hours north of San Francisco. For years, Lakeport was considered the budget-friendly alternative to places like Lake Tahoe. Buyers could enjoy lakefront living, boating, and close proximity to wine country without paying the extreme prices seen elsewhere in California. But over time, several major problems collided at once, creating a situation few housing markets in the state have faced simultaneously. The first disaster was wildfire destruction. According to local officials cited by National Public Radio in late 2025, nearly 70% of Lake County has burned over the past decade. Entire communities have spent years living under the constant threat of evacuation, smoke damage, and repeated fire seasons. The second issue was the collapse of the insurance market. A December 2024 report from the United States Senate Budget Committee identified Lake County as one of the hardest-hit areas in California for home insurance non-renewals. Private insurers began leaving the region, refusing to cover homes in high-risk fire zones. For thousands of homeowners, the California Fair Plan became the only remaining option, often at dramatically higher costs. Then came the third blow: the weakening local agricultural economy. Wine grapes are a major part of the region's income, but according to preliminary grape crush data from the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the average price for wine grapes in the Lake County district plunged from $1,877 per ton in 2023 to just $1,165 per ton by 2025. That represents a staggering 37.9% collapse in only 2 years. As these pressures piled on top of each other, the housing market began breaking down as well. Zillow's latest home value index shows the typical home in Lakeport now selling for around $379,300, marking a yearly decline of approximately 7.6%. When vineyard profits shrink, insurance companies pull out, and most of the surrounding county has already burned, the conversation changes completely. At that point, price becomes the only lever left for sellers trying to move a property. And if you have made it this far into the list, chances are you are paying close attention to what is really happening inside the California housing market. That is exactly what this channel focuses on. Every week, we break down these trends using real data and documented sources, while much of the mainstream media is still months behind the actual story unfolding on the ground. One subscription is all it takes to keep the next breakdown showing up directly in your feed. Number 8 on this list is a California mountain town with a distinction no homeowner wants to hear. According to industry risk data, every single property in the community is classified as being at major wildfire risk, not just a large percentage of homes, literally all of them. Idyllwild Pine Cove is a small mountain community in Riverside County, located high in the San Jacinto Mountains at an elevation of roughly 5,400 feet, about 2 hours east of Los Angeles. Fewer than 4,000 people live there full-time, although the seasonal cabin population grows much larger during busy months. For years, Idyllwild developed a reputation as a quiet, creative escape. It became known as the kind of place where artists, musicians, and writers disappeared for inspiration. Many Los Angeles residents bought cabins there decades ago and held on to them for years as personal retreats or family vacation homes. Throughout the 2000s and 10s, property prices climbed steadily, and during the pandemic housing surge, the market accelerated even faster. Remote workers from Los Angeles suddenly realized they could turn weekend cabins into permanent residences, and demand exploded almost overnight. But eventually, the realities of wildfire danger started overwhelming the market itself. According to wildfire risk data integrated by Redfin through First Street Analytics, 100% of the properties in Idyllwild Pine Cove are projected to face major wildfire risk over the next 30 years. That kind of risk profile has completely changed the insurance landscape. Private insurance companies have spent the last several years pulling out of the area, unwilling to continue covering homes in such high-risk zones. As a result, many homeowners have been forced onto California's Fair Plan, the state-backed insurer designed as a last resort when traditional coverage disappears. And the situation became even more painful when the Fair Plan implemented a massive 35.8% rate increase that began affecting policy renewals in 2026. Those rising costs are now landing directly on homeowners already struggling with declining property values. Recent numbers from Redfin show the median sale price in Idyllwild Pine Cove falling to around $513,000, representing an annual decline of roughly 8.5%. Zillow's Home Value Index paints a similar picture, placing the typical home value closer to $499,000, down about 5.6% over the past year. The community itself has not disappeared. The artists are still there. The writers and longtime residents are still there. The mountain retreat atmosphere still exists exactly as it always did. What has changed is the willingness of buyers to pay peak pandemic prices for homes that many private insurance companies no longer want to touch. Number 7 is probably the biggest surprise anywhere on this list. Unlike many of the other cities we have covered, this is not a wildfire-prone mountain community or a tiny vacation town with only a few thousand permanent residents. This is a major urban center, one of the largest cities in California. And right now, it is being described by several major housing analysts as one of the weakest real estate markets in the entire country. Oakland is home to roughly 440,000 residents and sits in Alameda County directly across the bay from downtown San Francisco, connected by the iconic San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. Throughout the 2000s and 10s, Oakland built a powerful reputation as the Brooklyn of the Bay Area. It was marketed as the more creative, more affordable, and more authentic alternative to San Francisco. The city became known for its restaurants, nightlife, art scene, and walkable neighborhoods filled with younger professionals and commuters. As the city's image improved, housing prices exploded alongside it. Around 2013, the average Oakland home was worth roughly $400,000. By the peak of the pandemic-era housing boom in 2022, prices had climbed past $900,000. Then the foundation underneath that growth started cracking from multiple directions at the exact same time. The first major blow came from the technology layoffs that swept across the Bay Area during 2023 and 2024. Oakland depended heavily on commuters, tech workers, renters, and buyers tied to the regional economy, and that demand suddenly weakened. At the same time, downtown office vacancy rates surged beyond 30% and remained stuck there, hollowing out large sections of the city's commercial core. Major employers with headquarters in Oakland, including the Clorox Company, also began reducing their physical presence in the city. Public safety concerns added another layer of pressure. Even longtime residents started openly acknowledging that conditions in certain neighborhoods had deteriorated beyond what they had experienced before. Meanwhile, luxury high-rise condo projects approved during the boom years kept reaching completion, flooding the market with new units at a time when the renter and buyer demand simply was no longer there to absorb them. According to Zillow's March 2026 Home Value Index, the typical Oakland home is now selling for approximately $716,248, reflecting an annual decline of about 8.5%. Once inflation is factored in, the real decline is estimated to be closer to 11.4%, making it one of the steepest drops among major cities in America. Reports published in May 2026 by outlets including the San Francisco Chronicle, New York Post, NBC Bay Area, ABC 7 News, and Patch highlighted how severe the downturn has become in some parts of the city. In Oakland zip code 94612, home values have reportedly fallen roughly 30% below their 2022 highs. The condominium sector has been hit especially hard. According to an April 2026 analysis from the Wall Street Journal, condo prices in parts of Oakland have effectively returned to levels last seen back in 2014. Oakland's housing market is not collapsing because of wildfire risk. It is not an insurance crisis story either. What is happening here is something different. The narrative that drove the city's growth for an entire decade stopped matching the reality buyers were seeing on the ground. And once that shift happened, the prices started following it down. And before we move into the top 5, leave a comment with 2 things: the city you currently live in and whether home prices there have gone up or down over the last year. We read through every comment, and honestly, the patterns showing up in the comment section often reveal more about the real housing market than official reports ever do. Those responses are helping shape future breakdowns, especially from viewers living in the cities we are covering here. Number 6 is another mountain community in the San Bernardino range, but this one tells a very different story. Here, the housing market did not become impossible to sell overnight. First, it became nearly impossible to insure. Long before buyers started backing away, insurance companies had already decided the risk was too high. Lake Arrowhead is home to around 10,000 full-time residents and sits about 90 miles east of downtown Los Angeles at an elevation of roughly 5,100 feet in the San Bernardino Mountains. The community has deep roots stretching back to the 1920s, when it was developed as an upscale mountain getaway for wealthy Southern California families. The area became famous for its historic lodges, towering pine forests, private gated neighborhoods, and exclusive lake access. Over the decades, Lake Arrowhead built a reputation as one of California's most prestigious mountain retreat markets. The Disney family owned property there, and for generations, many Hollywood figures kept second homes in the community as well. For nearly a century, owning property in Lake Arrowhead felt like one of the safest bets in California real estate. Prices rose steadily decade after decade, and the market developed a reputation for dependable long-term appreciation. Then, wildfire risk slowly started changing the equation. The Old Fire in 2003, the Pilot Fire in 2016, and the El Dorado Fire in 2020 each pushed closer to the community. None of them completely destroyed the market overnight, but every major wildfire added another warning sign for insurance companies evaluating future exposure. By 2023, many private insurers had already spent years quietly pulling back from the Lake Arrowhead area. By 2024, entire zip codes were increasingly dependent on California's FAIR Plan because traditional insurance carriers no longer wanted to write policies there. The problem became even worse when the FAIR Plan implemented a 35.8% rate increase affecting renewals in 2026. Homeowners in Lake Arrowhead are now being forced to absorb those higher costs because for many of them, there is simply no private market alternative left. According to March 2026, data from Redfin, the median sale price in Lake Arrowhead has fallen to around $525,000, representing an annual decline of roughly 8.7%. What happened here is revealing. Buyers did not suddenly stop wanting mountain homes for no reason. They stopped showing up because insurance companies had already signaled that the underlying risk no longer made financial sense. In many ways, the housing market simply caught up to conclusions the insurance underwriters had reached years earlier. The mountains themselves did not suddenly change. The lake is still there. The forests are still there. What changed was the risk calculation behind owning property in a place increasingly viewed as vulnerable to catastrophic wildfire exposure. Number 5 stands out from every other city on this countdown because the collapse here is not being driven by wildfire danger, insurance problems, or any of the crises dominating California headlines. Instead, this market is being hit by something much older and far more fundamental. The numbers simply stopped making sense. Apple Valley is a desert community of around 76,000 residents located in San Bernardino County, roughly 80 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. For decades, Apple Valley was known as a quiet, affordable high desert town where homes were relatively cheap, land was plentiful, and traffic felt non-existent compared to the crowded coastal cities. Then the pandemic completely changed the trajectory of the market. When remote work exploded in 2020, buyers from Los Angeles suddenly began searching for affordable alternatives farther inland. Apple Valley became one of the closest desert communities where buyers could still find available inventory at prices that seemed reasonable compared to LA. The surge happened incredibly fast. Median home prices jumped from roughly $310,000 in 2020 to more than $500,000 by the middle of 2022. In less than 2 years, longtime residents earning local wages watched their hometown become increasingly unaffordable. But eventually, the pandemic-driven frenzy began unraveling. Once mortgage rates climbed above 6.5%, the affordability equation collapsed for many Los Angeles buyers who had fueled the boom. At the same time, as remote work became more normalized and some employers started pulling workers back toward coastal offices, the rush into distant inland communities began slowing down. That left Apple Valley facing a difficult reality. The local income base, which had been completely overwhelmed during the boom years, suddenly became the primary support holding up home prices again. According to March 2026 data from Redfin, based on 88 completed home sales, the median home price in Apple Valley has now fallen to approximately $423,000. That marks a 9.33% yearly decline, making it one of the sharpest documented drops anywhere in California. What makes this market especially important is how clean the data appears. Unlike some smaller towns with limited transactions, Apple Valley's sample size gives a much clearer picture of what is happening in real time. The irony is hard to ignore. During the pandemic, outside buyers priced local residents out of their own housing market. Now, in the post-pandemic environment, rising costs and weaker affordability are beginning to price out the very buyers who caused the boom in the first place. Apple Valley may be one of the clearest examples in California of a housing correction driven by the oldest rule in real estate. Eventually, prices have to reconnect with what people can realistically afford to pay. And before we move into the top 4, make sure to hit the notification bell if you want to keep following these housing breakdowns as they happen. Otherwise, by the time the algorithm finally pushes the next video into your feed, the market may already look completely different. Because the next 4 cities are not just stories about affordability or mortgage rates anymore. These are neighborhoods where homeowners have lost more value in a single year than many Americans build through decades of owning a home. Number 3 on this list is the location where the consequences of the Palisades fire extended even further than expected and reshaped the housing story in a very direct way. Topanga is a small, unincorporated community in Los Angeles County, tucked deep inside the Santa Monica Mountains between Malibu and the San Fernando Valley. The full-time population is roughly 8,000 people. Over the past several decades, Topanga has developed a very distinct identity, almost completely separate from the wider Los Angeles metropolitan area. For years, it became known as a refuge for artists, writers, and musicians who wanted distance from the intensity of city life. The homes built in the canyon reflected that mindset too, often unconventional in design, built on rugged terrain where traditional suburban development would never have been practical. Because of that unique character, property values in Topanga carried a consistent premium for decades, supported not just by location, but by lifestyle and culture. That changed sharply in January 2025, when the Palisades fire expanded into nearby canyon areas, crossed Topanga Canyon Boulevard, and burned through parts of Old Topanga Canyon Road. For the first time in the modern era, Topanga was pulled directly into the Los Angeles County wildfire perimeter in a very visible way. The impact on the housing market since then has been severe. According to Redfin's March 2026 data, based on a limited sample of 6 closed sales, the median home price in Topanga fell to approximately $1,718,750, reflecting a year-over-year decline of about 43.3%. Price per square foot showed a similar drop of roughly 43.4%. Even the following month showed consistent pressure, with a small number of transactions still pointing to declines near 40%. While small sample sizes can exaggerate percentage swings, broader trend data from Zillow's Smoothed Home Value Index still confirms a clear downward shift in values. Real estate broker Justin Borges of LA Metro Home Finder described the situation in his 2026 fire zone analysis, noting that Topanga Canyon sits within California's very high fire hazard severity designation from the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. In practical terms, that classification has made traditional insurance extremely difficult and in many cases impossible to secure. And that is where the real shift becomes visible. The community itself has not changed. The culture, the landscape, and the creative identity of Topanga are still there. What has changed is the financial reality of owning a home in a place where insurers are increasingly unwilling to provide coverage for million-dollar canyon properties. The demand for the lifestyle remains. The demand for the risk profile, however, has not kept up. Number 2 on this list is arguably the most famous stretch of coastline in the world, and at the same time, one of the most aggressively repriced luxury housing markets in California. Malibu is a city of roughly 10,500 residents in Los Angeles County, running along about 21 miles of the Pacific coastline between Santa Monica and Ventura County. For decades, Malibu stood as the ultimate exception in California real estate. No matter what the broader market was doing, Malibu almost always moved upward. The buyer profile was unlike anywhere else. Celebrities, legacy wealth, international investors, and ultra-wealthy buyers competing for ocean views, privacy, and homes perched above the Pacific with no neighbors in sight. Even through multiple recessions over the last 40 years, Malibu's long-term price trajectory rarely broke. That long-standing pattern shifted after the Palisades fire in January 2025, which pushed beyond the Palisades area and moved into sections of the Malibu coastline. Homes along Pacific Coast Highway were damaged or destroyed, and large parts of the Santa Monica Mountains fire perimeter were permanently reshaped. After that event, the insurance landscape changed rapidly. Private insurers who had already been gradually reducing exposure in Malibu over several years began pulling back even faster. Many properties were pushed onto California's FAIR plan, which replaced private coverage at significantly higher premiums. For the first time in decades, buyers who had treated Malibu real estate as a near-certain appreciation asset started seriously questioning whether properties in certain zones could even be properly insured. According to March 2026 data from Redfin, the median Malibu home price now sits around $4.8 million, reflecting an annual decline of about 13.6%. However, other market trackers show an even sharper correction, with some analyses placing the median closer to $3,447,000, which would represent a drop of nearly 38% year over year. Additional reporting suggests that land values in fire-affected sections of the city have fallen anywhere between 20% and 60%, depending on exposure and insurance availability. What hasn't changed is the coastline, the views, or the prestige of the address itself. What has changed is the number of buyers willing to pay peak prices for properties that may now come with severe insurance limitations or fire-related risk history attached. In simple terms, Malibu is no longer being priced purely on lifestyle and scarcity. It is being repriced on risk. And finally, number one on this list is the city where, over just the past 2 years, homeowners have experienced the largest documented drop in property value anywhere in California. Altadena is an unincorporated community in Los Angeles County, located at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Pasadena. Before the recent fire events, the population was around 42,000 people. For most of the 20th century, Altadena was known as a stable, middle-class alternative to the more expensive neighborhoods nearby. It featured historic craftsman homes, tree-lined streets, and a long-standing reputation as one of the last places in the region where working and middle-class families could still afford to live. By September 2023, that long-term stability had already pushed prices to record levels, with the median home reaching about $1.5 million. At that point, the market appeared to be at its peak. Then everything changed after the Eaton fire ignited on January 7, 2025. According to the final incident report from CAL FIRE, the fire became one of the most destructive in state history, destroying 9,418 structures and resulting in 17 fatalities. Within months, the housing market reacted violently. By March 2025, the median sale price had dropped to roughly $710,000, representing a peak-to-trough decline of about 53% in just 18 months. Even as the market tried to stabilize, uncertainty remained. A 2026 report in The Real Deal quoted local broker Lisa Ashworth of the agency, describing the pricing environment as a kind of ongoing dance, where sellers and buyers are still trying to figure out what properties are actually worth under new risk conditions. By early 2026, data from Redfin showed some recovery, with the median price rising to around $990,000, though still about 34% below pre-fire highs. Meanwhile, Zillow's Smoothed Home Value Index placed typical home values near $1,165,712, indicating a smaller but still noticeable annual decline when volatility is averaged out. At the same time, investor activity has increased significantly. Estimates from Realtor.com suggest that roughly 30 to 40% of vacant lots are now being purchased by investors, while many long-term residents who lost homes their families had owned for generations are effectively priced out of returning. What remains is a very different housing market than the one that existed before 2023. The same craftsman homes are still being sold, but they are now changing hands under completely different conditions, at different price levels, and often to very different types of buyers. Altadena in 2026 is not simply a down market. It is a reset market, where the old pricing structure no longer applies, and the new one is still forming. And with that, the broader picture becomes clear. These 10 cities are not separate stories. They are different expressions of the same underlying shift. California real estate is no longer just priced on growth and desirability. It is being repriced around risk, affordability, and long-term viability in ways the market spent decades ignoring. The question now is no longer whether prices will go up. It is what the next stable price level actually looks like, and who is still able to buy into it.